And we've had teams like the Brooklyn Nets and the Oklahoma City Thunder making a point of noting when they have tested their players, they've used private labs for tests so as not to put any extra burden on the public health system. But the bottom line is that we're getting all of these reports of hundreds of NBA players and employees getting tests while tests are still scarce to the American public. And New York Mayor Bill de Blasio fired a tweet out yesterday. He noted that he wished the infected Nets players a speedy recovery, but he also added, quote, "With all due respect, an entire NBA team should not get tested for COVID-19 while there are critically ill patients waiting to be tested. Tests should not be for the wealthy, but for the sick," he said. What is your response to that?
I of course understand his point, and that it's unfortunate we're at this position as a society where it's triage when it comes to testing. And so the fundamental issue obviously is there are insufficient tests. I'd only say in the case of the NBA, we've been following the recommendations of public health officials. I mean, let me begin with the situation in Oklahoma City last Wednesday night. The Utah Jazz did not ask to be tested. The Oklahoma public health official there on the spot not only required that they be tested, but they weren't allowed to leave their locker room, which was for at least 4 hours after the game, where they had to stay, masks on, in the locker room. They couldn't leave until the health authorities had tested them. So, I mean, that was our first case. And then what followed, when we then had an additional positive test the next day, the protocol then followed that we then followed with, again, health officials and our doctor's recommendations, that we then looked at essentially that group of teams that were most proximate to the initial team that had tested positive. And then the circle expanded from there. And so I understand it, but we've had 8 NBA teams, full teams that have been tested now, and members of other teams that were showing symptoms. And again, I understand from a public health standpoint why some people have reacted the way they did, but I'd say from an NBA standpoint, we were following directives. And I just add on top of that, I mean, as much credit people have given the NBA for being a first mover here, and again, think how much has changed in just a week, Rachel. Yeah. When we suspended our season last Wednesday night, no one, as far as I know, no public health official, certainly no one contacted me and said the NBA should no longer be playing. I believe at that time there was one NBA city that had passed an ordinance, San Francisco, saying not that we needed to shut down, but that we shouldn't be playing in front of players. And of course, one of the reasons we were looking at the issue. But for the fact that we had tested Rudy Gobert, I mean, there's a chance we would have been playing for several more days. And then, it seemingly, after that Wednesday night, most of the other professional leagues quickly followed, and I think we all collectively realized we needed to stop playing, and then several other institutions followed behind us. So again, I understand there are many sides to these issues, but I also think that by virtue of an NBA player being tested and the kind of attention it brought, my sense was, especially among young people in the United States, people were not taking these protocols all that seriously until the NBA did what it did.
Yeah, I want to go back to that night, right? March 11th, you were the first league to suspend. You did become the catalyst for the rest of the sports world. And obviously, the plan was to go ahead with games that night. We had several that had already started. So I just wanted you to take me through a little bit what happened, because a few hours earlier, I know you held a Board of Governors meeting where there was differing opinions, but the consensus was to maybe just go ahead and keep playing for now without fans. When the test result comes in for Rudy Gobert, was it a split-second decision? Did you have any doubt? How did you make that call?
Well, fortunately, I've had the benefit of a few things because in the NBA. One, we have a large presence in China. We have about 200 of our employees based in China. So we've been living this at the league office since mid-January. And so I think that we've been on alert as at least to what the consequences could be if the coronavirus had spread to the United States. And then clearly as the weeks had gone on, as it gone through Europe, the sense was that it was coming here and there was no reason to believe that this virus knew boundaries or or borders of any kind, and that was going to come potentially to impact the United States in a similar way as China and Europe. So that day, last Wednesday, we had a full board meeting. It was done by conference call, and we were discussing the options. And the options were essentially, there were some people who were asking whether we could continue to play with fans, because remember, this is only a week ago. Most jurisdictions were not even recommending that we play without fans. And it wasn't until that day, last Wednesday, that Dr. Fauci, in response to a question at a Congressional House Oversight Committee, and it was only in response to a question, when asked should the NBA, and I think he was asked about one of the college leagues as well, whether they should continue playing with fans, he said, I recommend at this point that they play without fans, not that we shut down the league. So that recommendation came a week ago. So we had our board meeting that day. Again, there were some who were saying, just because there's so much uncertainty and that we're sort of waiting for the government to give them a directive, frankly, as to what they should be doing. But I'd say the most teams broke down into two categories. I'd say those who felt we should see if we can play our games without fans, and others who were saying, let's take a hiatus. Again, it goes to the state of mind at that time. Nobody had a sense of how long it could be, but I think a hiatus was a notion of a shorter period. And what we were doing at the league office, the notion on that call was not to take a vote, but to take in all the information and then go back to the public health experts who've been advising us, namely Dr. Vivek Murthy, who's the former Surgeon General under President Obama, and Dr. David Ho, who's a researcher here in New York affiliated with Columbia University.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.